In 1975, 2 Viking spacecraft were launched, each of which was programmed to land a robot on the Martian surface. If we just have landed on Mars and got no scientific data, we would not have considered that we have had a success. We've learned many things about Mars from Viking 1, but the main thing is that there was obviously no life on Mars. When Viking 1 made its touchdown on the Martian surface, it was at 1.5 degrees per second and a max of 0.2 Gs. After they landed on Mars, they put out a weather system for about 7 years. It recorded pressure, temperature, and clouds on the Martian surface. If you take a look at the first picture, you can see a big rock. They named the rock Big Joe, that was about 25 or 30 feet from the lander. If we had hit that rock, the lander, Viking 1, would have been smashed, turned over, upside down. We had no idea that the rock was there, so landing on Mars was really lucky that we did not hit that rock and smash the spacecraft or tip it upside down, and it would ruin the entire mission. The flight is not like today, how we see the rockets come back and they will be reused. Its first stage after it got into space was disconnected and just floating around in space, as the second stage continues to thrust the Viking 1 towards Mars. Going to Mars was 500 million miles, and once it was on its way, the solar panels unfold, capturing energy from the sun. Energy is used to power the thrusters to push the Viking or guide the Viking towards Mars.
The purpose of the Viking spacecraft: scoop up some soil and see if the red planet had developed any life.
Scientists practiced for years on launching other spacecraft simulators and other training techniques to complete this mission. For Viking 1 to arrive at Mars, it took roughly about 300 days, a little over a year.
Before this time, they were only able to see from about 72 million miles away, with a telescope from the McDonald Observatory. The planet just looked like a red globe from so far away, not being able to see any of its unique features. The scientists needed to make sure that the picture is as detailed as possible, spending over $23 million on the camera system alone.
Viking 1 landed on Mars the 19th of June, and the second spacecraft landed on Mars on the 7th of August. The reason why they had 2 different spacecraft is because they wanted a little bit of information, because they've never seen Mars before, out of the first spacecraft, so when the second one landed, they could build on top of that and have even more information. And having 2 spacecraft is tough because the technology in that time was only supposed to handle 1 active landed mission at a time. And the fact that they accomplished 2 was a very big success in that time period. Another reason why they had 2 different missions is because the first one was picked for a very safe spot, which, as we know, Big Joe was 25-30 feet away, but they didn't know that. So they went to pick a safe spot to land so they could be more creative with the second mission and maybe a riskier spot to gain more and more information.
When landing on the planet, they injected the soil with some nutrients and wonder about how the soil would react to it. And by surprise, the soil metabolized all of the nutrients put into it, releasing a steady stream of radioactive gases immediately following the injection. Viking 2 had also injected the soil and it had the same reaction. But when both spacecrafts tried this experiment a week later, the results came back negative. Scientists say that the ultraviolet rays that beam at the surface of the soil and the lack of water and the oxidizing nature of its soil prevent the fermentation of living organisms on Mars. The Viking spacecrafts were supposed to stay for 90 days after landing, but each one of them stood for way longer than that. The Viking 2 was the first of the spacecrafts to die, being shut down on July 15, 1978, after 706 orbits of Mars, after a leak of its propulsion system caused it to completely lose control. Viking 1 was to shut down August of 1980, after using all of the altitude control gas, after a whole 1,045 orbits around Mars. Moving back to the soil samples, they took them from two places. Soil out from where the sun has been hitting it all this time, and soil from underneath the giant rock, Big Joe. They did this so that they could add different variables to the experiment, hoping to achieve the radioactive gas that they had not so long ago. Just like before, these experiments unfortunately failed. But if they were to succeed, they were hoping to try the next step, to see if Mars's soil could try to maintain some sort of plant life. The only problem being the low oxygen levels that Mars had contained. Mars contained 95% carbon dioxide, 2.5% nitrogen, 1.6% argon, and a whopping 0.13% oxygen. Nowhere near enough to support any kind of plant life. So that dream for the scientists were crushed. The Viking spacecrafts have pulled the most groundbreaking information out of any spacecraft ever, and this is why they are the most influential spacecrafts the world has ever seen.